On June 18th, 2023, the OceanGate Titan, a submersible that was on its way to the Titanic wreck site, imploded, killing all 5 passengers, including OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush. As the disaster played out in real time, there initially was hope for a rescue. But once it became clear that the catastrophic event had left no survivors, the investigations began. This past June, Netflix released a documentary on OceanGate and how so many things went wrong, culminating in that 2023 disaster. There was a horrible disregard of basic safety measures. There's evidence that there was a deliberate effort to work outside of or between regulatory agencies and inspection protocols, and a toxic company culture created by CEO Stockton Rush that led to firings, threatened firings, a near complete turnover of the senior leadership team, and even a whistleblower that risked everything to try to shine a light on what he saw happening at the company. Now, I'm going to be honest. I'm not entirely sure why I find this story so fascinating, especially given the fact that it has a tragic ending. But I did realize one thing while watching the documentary. Like all other companies, OceanGate had a supply chain. And those suppliers had a front row seat to what was unfolding. So in this episode of Art of Supply, I will walk you through OceanGate's evolutionary journey, first to buy and retrofit their submersibles, and then to build them. I'll review the different suppliers that played a role in manufacturing the Titan. And then we'll consider the bigger challenge presented by innovation that seems to defy convention. When is an idea truly groundbreaking, and when is it simply reckless? Now, that does apply here because OceanGate was trying to do something truly unique, and that was to make a carbon fiber submersible. Most of these are made of metal, which makes them stronger, but also heavier and more expensive to operate. OceanGate was actually the first company to use carbon fiber in the hull of a deep sea submersible, which sounds exciting. We always want to be the first to do something. But at the same time, we know how this story ends. They were winding carbon fiber filament around a cylindrical hull. Carbon fiber has been used extensively in both aerospace and automotive, and we see evidence of that in their supplier choices. Now, I'm no engineer, so take all this with a grain of salt. But I did read a bit about the difference between using carbon fiber in aerospace manufacturing versus using it in a deep sea environment. Carbon fiber is light and strong, but those two environments are very different. The main structural difference between an aircraft fuselage and a submersible is the direction of the pressure. With an airplane, you have pressure pushing from the inside out. One of the articles I read compared this to a balloon, something I understand a whole lot better than airplanes or submersibles. The tightly wound carbon fibers are great at resisting expansion. In fact, carbon fiber is 4 times better than steel wire, and it does a better job of keeping its shape under tension. Now, here's the problem. With the submersible, the pressure is directed from the outside in. And when you put carbon fiber in a compression situation, it's not going to end well. I should note that using carbon fiber to make a submersible was not an idea original to Stockton Rush or the OceanGate team. Composite Energy Technologies, or CET, is a Rhode Island-based company that specializes in exactly that, building carbon fiber pressure vessels for submersibles. They have an impressive record of safety and reliability, and they say that carbon fiber can be used in this way as long as the vessel is designed and tested properly, which we know OceanGate did not do. As CET President Chase Hogeboom told Design News, manufacturing variances can undermine the intended results. Quote, "These variances can determine the ultimate strength of the item." And as sad as it is, that checks out. So there are 3 core OceanGate crafts that come into this story. One of my core sources of information for this episode is a United States Coast Guard document the Marine Board's report into the implosion of the submersible Titan in the North Atlantic Ocean near the wreck site of the RMS Titanic, resulting in the loss of 5 lives on June 18th, 2023. It's actually the title of the report. That Coast Guard report was released on August 4th, 2025, after the Netflix documentary came out. I will link to that report in today's show notes so that you can read about it if you're interested in this. There's a lot of photos and engineering detail in there that go beyond the story I'll tell today. OceanGate's first submersible was the Antipodes. They acquired this steel-hulled craft and used it from 2009 to 2013. It could do some of what OceanGate wanted, but not all of it. Most importantly, it was never going to be able to make the extreme dive to the Titanic wreck site. The Titanic sits on the ocean floor, 12,500 feet, or about 2.5 miles down. It's in what is called a midnight zone, which is a deep sea environment with immense pressure and near freezing temperatures. So even for deep sea dives, this is exceptionally challenging. And that was the goal of OceanGate, to make Titanic wreck site tourism a commercially viable option. Once it was determined that the Antipodes had reached its peak without reaching the destination, the company had to start considering other options. According to OceanGate co-founder Guillermo Sondland, the company did not originally intend to develop its own vessels. They always intended to buy them. But as they started discussing the requirements with submersible manufacturers, they found out that no one company could deliver what they needed. So what we see in the next 2 iterations is OceanGate recognizing that they were going to have to buy materials from here and components from there and installation from here and curing from there and move the vessel around and work with different companies and employ their own people in the process for design, for checking, for assembly, and it ultimately made it a much more complicated process. OceanGate's second try was the Cyclops 1. This was another steel-hulled craft, so we're still not at full carbon fiber composite. They purchased a submersible called the Lula 500, and then they made significant modifications. Despite all of their efforts and significant investments, it still wasn't fit for their purpose. Now, they couldn't find someone to build it for them completely. This sort of half and half, buying one and tearing it down and building it back up, also didn't work. So OceanGate went back to the drawing board again and realized they were going to have to design and manufacture their own submersible from scratch. That is when work began on the Cyclops 2, the submersible craft that would eventually become known as the Titan. Now, adding to this story is the fact that although the Cyclops 2, or the Titan, operated as one vehicle, it actually had 2 hulls, and the company changed their supply chain from hull 1 to hull 2. The first hull was used from 2018 until it cracked in 2019 and had to be retired from service. Hull 2 was used from 2021 until the end of the company's journey in 2023. This vessel was materially different in that its construction was carbon fiber laid on top of a stainless steel structural form. And OceanGate worked with a number of different suppliers to make the 2 Titan hulls. The first hull was made by a company called Spencer Composites. They signed a contract in January of 2017 to build the carbon composite cylinder for the submersible. At the time, Spencer Composites was the only company to have previously made a carbon fiber hull for a manned submersible. So clearly, they were the right company for OceanGate to be talking to. But then we start seeing challenges. For instance, they were only given 6 weeks to do the work. That was the hull that cracked in 2019, taking it out of service. And immediately, work began on a second hull for the Titan. But they didn't go back and revise their work or renew their contract with Spencer Composites. They started working with different companies that did not have experience making carbon fiber hulls for manned submersibles. So as work began on the second hull, the work began, sadly, for the vehicle that would ultimately collide with the ocean floor. For this hull, OceanGate selected providers that did not have experience for deep sea diving. Most of them had their experience in aerospace, where we get back to this understanding of the different directions of pressure and the conditions that this submersible was going to have to be able to withstand. On March 30th, 2020, and we all know what was going on in March of 2020, a press release was issued stating that OceanGate had selected Toray Composite Materials America as their provider of, quote, pre-preg carbon fiber. Now, pre-preg carbon fiber has been pre-impregnated with a resin system by the manufacturer. It ultimately makes it stronger. And this carbon fiber is delivered as a flat sheet on a roll, sometimes split into tapes or rows. So basically, it's a very specialized raw material. Toray did have extensive experience. They were a provider for Boeing and the aerospace industry in general, which again means that we can rely on their ability to make this carbon fiber, but not necessarily for this specific application. In that press release, OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush stated that Toray would play a, quote, critical role in developing the next generation of submersibles. Philip Schell, Toray's vice president of industrial sales, said, quote, in order to provide the most effective solutions to build equipment for new markets, like the deep oceans of the blue economy, we must use high-performance composite materials in equipment designs that can withstand extremely high external pressures. And he goes on to talk about how exciting it is and reaching the vast explored regions below the surface of the Earth's oceans. It is so sad how many hopes and ambitions, not to mention lives, ultimately went down with the ship. Now, if Toray made the composite material and then they sent it to another company, Electro Impact, for installation on the hull, like Hull 1, Hull 2 was made in just 6 weeks. They used a multi-stage process to wind and curve the 5-inch thick hull in 5 separate layers. Interestingly, part of the manufacturing process was to make and test a 1/3 scale hull. So Electro Impact was given 3 weeks to create this 1/3 scale model. Now, the interesting thing is, according to that Coast Guard report, in June of 2020, a second 1/3 scale model was made by an unknown entity. To quote, this 1/3 scale model had quality issues, but it was better than the one Electro Impact made. We don't know who made that alternate model, but the U.S. Coast Guard report mentioned may suggest that OceanGate was already pre-qualifying additional suppliers based on the manufacturing defects they were seeing from Electro Impact, which means that if there had been a Cyclops 3, maybe they would call it Titan 2, they were going to be switching their supply base yet again. Nonetheless, Electro Impact did go on to make the final ill-fated hull using those materials from Toray. Electro Impact laid the carbon fibers and then sent the hull to another supplier, Janicki, who cured the material in its ovens. Yet another supplier, Collier Aerospace, who offers third-party engineering services, was hired to stress test the Titan. And interestingly, in that contract, there's a note that they would have continued to support the OceanGate team if there had been a Cyclops 3/Titan 2. So once again, we get sort of a second piece of evidence that if they had moved to a new iteration of the craft, they were once again going to be doing a lot of things for the first time with a new group of suppliers. In my reading, I only found one lawsuit that included OceanGate suppliers, and that was a wrongful death suit filed by the family of Paul-Henri Nargeolet, P.H. Nargeolet. He's a French deep-sea explorer and Titanic expert known as Mr. Titanic, who was sadly one of 5 people who died upon the Titan when it imploded. I won't get into all of the workplace culture issues and disregard for safety, but I do think this story gives us a new way of thinking about innovation and supplier relationships. Innovation always comes with risk, even when it's exciting. I can certainly see the idea of taking a construction method from one space to another, like aerospace to undersea, but you have to make sure that plan is going to work. Did the suppliers know that the manufacturing defects they were struggling to overcome would ultimately lead to that fatal dive? There are clear signs that OceanGate pushed them on, but the suppliers had to agree to go with them. Innovation has to be counterbalanced with ethics and, ideally, transparency. Personally, I would love to know what it said in those contracts. There may have been language about the materials being used in proven versus experimental or unconventional ways, rendering it unguaranteed. That seems like a reasonable thing that would protect some of those suppliers. Maybe they had terms or language about the final use and installation needing to be inspected and certified or classed, which we also know OceanGate Titan was not. Those contracts likely went both ways, and given the level of innovation, it's entirely reasonable to think that there may have been non-disclosure terms preventing the suppliers from coming forward, even if they did have concerns about the use and installation of their materials. Now, in procurement, we talk about governance, and honestly, people usually roll their eyes at us. But in this case, a little bit of due diligence might have saved lives. We often celebrate speed, disruption, and bold ideas. But sometimes the most important thing a supplier can do, the most valuable contribution they can make, is to slow down. Or, if it's really necessary, to walk away, like so many members of the OceanGate leadership team did once they could no longer stand by the company's choices. Innovation can never just be about who moves first. It has to be about who can move first safely and sustainably with integrity. OceanGate suppliers did not go down with the Titan, but their work did, and so did 5 human beings. This particular implosion wasn't just physical. It was a collapse of oversight, communication, and shared accountability. So for every organization pursuing the next breakthrough, this story offers a haunting reminder. No innovation is worth pursuing if the supply base can't safely support it.